It is my great pleasure to introduce Kyle Ferguson, Assistant Professor of Philosophy at Hunter College in New York. Most of his publications are in bioethics, but he has a strong second line of research in Sellars studies. He is the co-author of the Big Fat Sellars book over there. Welcome, Kyle.
Thank you, Jeremy and Ronald, for organizing this. I feel very lucky to be here, very honored to be on a program with all of you, and thank you for all of your contributions to this so far and for your time and your attention. When Wilfrid Sellars applied for the Rhodes Scholarship in 1933, he told the selection committee that he intended to use the opportunity at Oxford to study aesthetics and to study social philosophy, which might not be a surprise. But Cecil Rhodes specified in his will that he did not want the scholarship to go to merely bookworms. Rhodes wanted each candidate to be assessed in regard to other criteria, including, quote, his fondness of and success in manly outdoor sports, such as cricket, football, and the like. So in Sellars' application letter, he mentions tennis right after mentioning aesthetics, and he mentions fencing. But then he mentions what he calls his most important physical achievement, a trip to Mexico City in the summer of 1932. Sellars writes in that letter, "Going there, a friend and I hitchhiked on the highway, and coming back, we rode from Mexico City to the border on the tops of Pullman cars. One night, we traveled 500 or more miles. And while from there, we rode in blinds, on freight trains, and on locomotives." Now, I want to begin by telling you a story about something that happened aboard one of those trains. The story is highly relevant to the themes of this conference, and it will provide a vivid case of what we're all interested in. So the friend that Sellars mentions in this letter is a man named Charles Orr. Orr was an economist who would go on to have a globe-trotting career as an organizer and a labor scholar. And late in his life, Orr wrote a book manuscript, Recollections on Adventures Abroad. And in that manuscript, he devotes an entire chapter to his journey with Sellars. And the story that I want to tell you is from that chapter. So here's the story. Sellars and Orr are on their way back from Mexico City. They've just hopped a freight train somewhere in the American South, and they're joining on board several other migrant workers and men without homes. Orr says, "The train took us northward slowly and at first uneventfully, and then suddenly we were plunged into an adventure, into high drama indeed. They saw two boys of about 11 and 12 years of age running after the train, and there's a man behind them who was chasing them and shouting after them. The boys hopped onto the train, and they escaped the man and left him behind. And then the boys, once on board, told the men their sad story." So their unemployed father, I'm quoting Orr here, "Their unemployed father got drunk day after day. He tyrannized them all the time and sometimes beat them. It was hell at home, they said, so they decided to run away. They knew just how and when to catch the train because their house was next to the tracks where the train stopped every day. And they made their plans and climbed over the fence just as the train was pulling out. However, their father happened to see them, and he chased after them. They were trying to get to some family in Arkansas, they were trying to get to Arkansas. So their story touched the hearts of everyone in the car. The men became fatherly, giving the boys advice. And then, as if this adventure were not enough, drama descended upon us. We noticed a police car running along the highway parallel to the tracks. It slowed or sped to keep along with the train just abreast our car. Evidently, they'd been alerted and were looking for the boys. Instantly, the disparate men in that car, most of whom had never seen each other before, were welded into one solid but sentimental whole, against the cops, for the boys. So we placed the boys on opposite sides, sitting among the men. We all agreed that we knew nothing about any runaway boys. And just as expected, two policemen boarded our car at the next train stop and asked for the boys. They looked about, and not finding any two boys sitting together, they went away. We all felt a surge of relief and the ecstasy of victory. The boys left us at some junction town, hoping to catch a train across the river into Arkansas. Now, I don't mean to suggest that this experience planted the seeds of we intentions in Sellars' mind, but I do think it's clear from other archival evidence that Sellars was wrestling with the problems that he designed the concept of we intentions to solve as early as the mid-1930s. Instead, I tell this story because I think it provides a compelling and dramatic example of the phenomena that we all traveled here to discuss. The men on the train shared an intention. They acted together. They were moved by moral motivation. And each took himself and the others as having moral reasons for acting as they did in those circumstances. Sellars' practical philosophy contains all the resources one needs to analyze and understand what happened in this story. Okay, so enough storytelling. Let me turn to philosophy. So here's the big idea of my talk. So Sellars' legacy includes a comprehensive and fertile account of the moral ought in thought and language. And on his view, which I call metaethical intentionalism, deontic moral judgments as thoughts are a species of intention, namely we intentions, and as language, they're verbal expressions of such intentions. For Sellars, to judge morally is to intend communally. It is to intend sub specie communitatis, or more simply, to we intend, but there's lots of room for interpretation, and there's debates about what exactly that means. And so what I want to do in this presentation is elucidate Sellars' account of we intentions by putting it to work, by running it through the gauntlets of two contemporary issues in metaethics. So first, the problem of moral motivation, and second, the problem of moral reasons. Each of those problems involves an internalism-externalism divide, and I'm going to argue that Sellars is committed to both internalisms. In addition, I think that he can help us explain away the intuitions that make reasons externalism seem appealing. And in the end, I'll try to connect this to a debate in Sellars' scholarship about individualist and collectivist readings of we intentions. And also I want to, if time allows, make a proposal for collective intentionality theorists. So here's the plan. I'm going to start by summarizing metaethical intentionalism. I'll be as fast as I can doing that because I assume there's a lot of common ground there. And then I'll go through those two internalisms and end with some implications and connections. I think the heart of the talk really is going to be the reasons internalism. I think that the motivational internalism is not controversial. Okay, so a brief tour of Sellars' metaethics. One distinction that's basic here is the distinction between shall do and shall be intentions. Right? So we can intend to do things, and we can intend that certain states of affairs obtain. And in Sellars' way of sort of regimenting this with the shall operator, you have shall I do A versus shall be P. That, I think, is straightforward. But then there's the practicality thesis. So the shall be intention, shall be P, is a practical commitment only insofar as it leads to or generates a corresponding shall do intention, right? So I shall do that which is necessary to bring it about that P, or that which is conducive to making it the case that P. I'll add this subscript P here to indicate that this shall do intention is the practical commitment that flows from shall be P. And then there's the egocentricity thesis. So most generally, this is the idea that one expresses one's own intentions, never another's. All right? And we can say things like, you shall do A, they shall do A, but ultimately that's a disguised I intention, right? So if I say you shall do A, ultimately I'm expressing my intention that I will do that which is necessary to make it the case that you do A. So this is about my perspective. This is about the fact that anytime there's an intention expressing going on, it's always the speaker's expressing his or her own intentions. Then there's the relation between intentions and volitions. So Sellars uses the language of ripening, that intentions ripen into volitions. So I shall do A tomorrow is an intention, but as time goes by, and as I turn that general action into sort of a minimal, doable action, it can be a willing. I shall do A now, which can be verbally expressed or is expressed in my doing the action. Now, he says ripening, but I think that maybe cultivating or gardening is probably a better metaphor. With ripening, you just set the banana there and the ethylene does its job. Cultivating and gardening mean I have to do some work. So there's a lot of practical reasoning and perceptual activity that the agent needs to go through to make this move from an intention to a volition. And volitions initiate, or they are the initial stages of actions. And we intentions. So there are shall be we intentions. It shall sub we be the case that P. And there are shall do intentions. We shall, any of us, do A and C. The subscript we here indicates this intention's status as a we intention, whereas the subscript we here indicates that this intention was derived from a shall do we intention. So I, as one of us, shall do A and C. All of this comes together, and I'm going to set aside, tell me if this is a mistake later on. I'm going to set aside the stuff about categorically valid intentions and instead just talk about these two features that are part of the metaethical view. So Sellars' master idea in metaethics is that oughts are special cases of shall. So deontic moral judgments are a species of intention. Those express we intentions, or they express intentions that are derived or derivable from we intentions. So we shall, any of us, so ought can be understood in terms of we shall, any of us, do A and C, where we is the intersubjective form and the any of us is the intersubjective content. The form is what makes this shareable, while the content is what makes it universalizable. And then once you go through some inferential steps here, and you have shall, sub we, I do A and C, that subscript we indicates the form that belonged to the we intention up here, and the I sort of was derived from that intersubjective content in the we intention up here. All right, I think this is like reading scripture at a church. We all know this by heart. All right, so what does this mean for motivational internalism? So the problem of moral motivation is, we can put this as the question, what's the relationship between judging that one ought to do A, that moral judgment, and one's being motivated to do A? Internalists, motivational internalists, say that the relationship is of necessity or conceptual connection. So if you judge that you ought to do A, you're necessarily motivated to do A. While the externalist says, well, no, whether you're motivated or not is contingent, and it depends on other factors external to the judgment. So I want to say that Sellars is a motivational internalist because he identifies deontic moral judgments as intendings. So the motivational internalism, I think, follows from the kind of state, the kind of mental state that Sellars says moral judgments are, their intentions. All right, now, again, I think this one's easier than what's coming up because he's explicit about this. There's stuff in Obligation and Motivation and the revised version of that text, and even more explicit in On Knowing the Better and Doing the Worse, where he says, hey, I'm a motivational internalist. Now, he rejects a radical or extreme internalism, which would say anytime you make a moral judgment, you have a conclusively powerful motive. He rejects that because we sometimes do the worse. And I think we can put this in terms of Brink's distinction between strong and weak internalism. Sellars rejects strong internalism about motivation and instead endorses weak internalism. Right? So there's a conceptual connection between moral judgment and motivation. For Sellars, the moral judgment conceptually guarantees that the agent is motivated. Now, why do I say that? So here's what the argument looks like. Let's call it the argument from intentions. So if X is a deontic moral judgment, then X is an intention. And if X is an intention, then X is motivating. Therefore, if X is a deontic moral judgment, it's motivating. Premise one, I think, is just another way of putting metaethical intentionalism's main claim, that moral judgments are a species of intention. Premise two, I think, takes a little bit more work to establish. So why think intentions are necessarily motivating? Well, they're motivating because of their intimate tie to action. Only intentions can ripen into volitions, and this makes them different from doxastic states. So intentions and volitions are directly expressed by actions. Doxastic states aren't. So if Wilfrid says the train is heading north, he verbally expresses the doxastic state. And maybe there's this indirect way in which that belief gets expressed when he hops the train. But the direct expression of the intention or the volition here is expressed in the action. Or if he were to say in the first person narrative present while performing the action, I shall hop this train now, there the volition is expressed both in action and in speech. That the directness of the expression here, I think, makes it different from the related beliefs that are involved in acting. Another reason to think that this intimate tie to action makes intentions motivating is because of the sort of unique roles that practical commitments play in patterns of practical inference. So premise one and the conclusion here are practical commitments. These are intentions. This came up in the very first talk, right? Natalie's point that practical reasoning sort of ends in intentions. That unique role, I think, is part of what we're thinking about when we think about the intimate tie intentions have to actions, and that's what makes them motivating. So the relationship between an intention and a corresponding action is a matter of the intention's content. My intention to do A is related to the action of A-ing, right? But the motivational force, I think, is a matter of the status, the fact that this is an intention as opposed to a belief. The status, the fact that this is a practical commitment, that's what underwrites the claim that intentions are motivating. So the motivational guarantee of a moral judgment, it's not a species-level feature of deontic moral judgments. It's a feature of the genus. Right? Moral judgments are motivating because they're intentions. Not because they're moral, but because they're intentions. So Sellars is a motivational internalist. What about reasons internalism? I said this to Jeremy at lunch. I'm glad I remembered to say it to the rest of you. Sellars is the kind of guy who upsets the usual way we sort of characterize problems. So the reasons internalism, externalism divide gets messy once Sellars sort of takes it on. It's already messy because of the anachronism. And in other work, Jeremy has emphasized the features of Sellars' account that sound externalist. I'm going to emphasize the features that sound internalist about reasons. But I think it's complicated to sort of purely or wholly put him in one category or the other. All right, so the problem of moral reasons. What's the relationship between one's motivations and one's having a reason. The internalist thinks that reasons ascribing statements are true only if an agent is suitably motivated, while the externalist says no, reasons ascribing statements can be true independent of the ascribee's psychology. That is, one can have a reason to do A even if one is not so motivated. And I'm going to claim that Sellars is, that's an egregious typo. Sellars is a reasons internalist because he interprets reason statements as expressions of the speaker's own we intentions. Right? He's an internalist because reason statements are expressions of the speaker's own we intentions. And I think that he can explain away the intuitions that make externalism seem appealing. The problem gets its sort of best statement, its first statement in Bernard Williams' paper, Internal and External Reasons. And remember, he says there's these two forms of reason statement. One of them lends itself to an internalist reading. The other lends itself to an externalist reading. So A has a reason to phi is the internalist form. Right? And remember, internalism says that the truth conditions of this reasons statement include or make reference to the agent's motivational state. All right? So the truth of that claim depends on what's going on motivationally with the agent. Whereas with the external reasons statement, the truth conditions don't refer to the agent's motivational set. So like McDowell, I want to just limit our focus to moral reasons for action and ask, how does metaethical intentionalism apply to this issue? Okay? So there's two steps that I need to take. The first step is I want to transpose reason statements into the key of we intentions. All right? So these statements here, I need to transpose them into sort of we shall statements. So we shall any of us phi, A shall as one of us phi, or it shall be the case that A phis. All right? So these are just, I'm using that we intention template to say what's going on when one is expressing a reason statement. All right, so that's step one. And step two is recall what we said earlier about egocentricity and practicality. Intention expressing sentences are always and only used to express one's own intentions. So anytime I make one of these reasons statements, I'm actually expressing an intention with either of these forms. And that's even when the surface grammar suggests otherwise. Right? So if I say Bernard has a reason to phi, ultimately I have to change that into some intention that I have to make it the case that he phis. So if Wilfrid says there's a reason for Charles to fool the police, that's a shall be intention. It shall be the case that Charles fools the police, and that's a practical commitment only insofar as it generates this. I shall do that which is conducive to Charles fooling the police. All right, so this is Wilfrid expressing Wilfrid's we intention, even though the surface grammar suggests he's attributing a reason to Charles. So all reason statements are intention expressing sentences. Now there's a difficulty here because remember Williams posed the issue in terms of truth conditions, right? What are the truth conditions of a reason statement? But intention expressing sentences are not truth valuable. So given that the problem is about whether the truth conditions for these statements include reference to the motivational set of the agent or not, how do I do that now that the sentences we're talking about are intention expressing sentences, which don't have truth conditions? So here's my strategy is forget about truth conditions. Let's focus on the performance conditions of using a intention expressing sentence. Right? So what are the conditions? When we ask about the performance conditions, we're asking what are the conditions under which it'd be appropriate to use the sentence in question? This works for assertions. So using the sentence P is appropriate when I think that P. It works for intentions. Using I shall do A, that's appropriate when I intend to do A. And using a we intention expressing sentence is appropriate when I we intend. So we can set aside the truth conditions analysis of Williams type reasons statements and instead ask about the performance conditions for a we intention expressing sentence. Okay, well, what are the performance conditions of reasons statements on this view? I think they're the performance conditions of a we intention expressing sentence. So when I say there's a reason for A to phi, that's appropriate if and only if it would be appropriate for me to use one of these we intention expressing sentences. And those are appropriate only if I have those we intentions. So any case where it appears that an external reason statement is true is a case where expressing one's own moral judgments is appropriate. The reasons externalist mistakes the performance conditions of a we expressing sentence being satisfied for the truth conditions of an external reason statement being satisfied. And that explains, I think, the intuitions that externalists marshal in support of their view. All right, so the externalist says, these truth conditions are satisfied, but what's fooling them into thinking that is just that the performance conditions of their we intention expressing sentences are satisfied. Now, there's a similar move has been made by Catherine Wilson. There's something similar in spirit to what I'm suggesting here as what she says in a paper on internal reasons. And she reminds us that whenever we give reasons, we're engaged in a discursive activity that always involves a presenter and a presentee. A presented reason must belong to someone's motivational set, though not necessarily that of the presentee, who may deny that it is a reason at all. Reason statements aren't sort of free-floating. They're used to give reasons. So it looks like external reasons. So apparent external reason statements or reason statements that are apparently external are actually presenter internal reasons, but they may be presentee external. Now, McDowell, who's defending reasons externalism in his paper, Might There Be External Reasons, asks us to consider a case where an agent comes to consider matters aright. So you imagine some agent who doesn't take themselves to have a reason to do some action. And then there's this conversion that happens. And he comes to believe a reason. And he comes to believe that reason was true all along. So even when he didn't take himself to have a reason before, now he does. And he says, I had the reason all along. So these cases of conversion suggest that the external reason statement is true regardless of A's motivational set. How does the internalism that I'm suggesting handle the McDowell-type cases? So let's go back to the train. Imagine a guy, let's call him Dirk, and he says, I shall give up the brothers when the police board. All right, so he wants to turn them in. But then his fellow travelers give him reasons. And what giving Dirk reasons involves is expressing their own we intentions. So Wilfrid says, it shall sub we be the case that the brothers escape. Charles says, we shall, any of us, or we shall collectively protect the brothers from the police. Arlo says, we shall, any of us, do that which is conducive to making it the case that the brothers hide if the police search. And Leon says there's a reason for Dirk to do A, where A is conducive to the brothers escaping. Right? So these are all reasons-giving statements. They're all expressions of we intentions. And suppose that they work, and Dirk changes his mind. So this conversion process occurred. So Dirk now says, I shall, sub we, do that which is conducive to helping the brothers escape. All right, so before he didn't take himself to have a reason, and now he takes himself to have a reason. This is the type of conversion that McDowell is talking about. So how do I characterize this? Well, post-conversion, the reason statement now seems true to Dirk. Dirk has a reason to phi. Dirk thinks, yeah, that's true. And he might say, that was true all along. But that's because he came to have new we intentions. And these, I think, are the same we intentions that his fellow travelers were expressing pre-conversion. And they were inviting him to share those intentions. Those intentions were shareable because of their intersubjective form. And the giving of reasons, the expressing of we intentions, is an invitation for the presentee to share in them. Right? So when Arlo said there's a reason for Dirk to phi, that reason statement was licensed because Arlo had that we intention. He had the corresponding we intention that gets expressed when he makes the reason statement. Right? So I think what the we intention that Arlo's expressing in this reason statement is a shall, we, any of us, phi. And what I want to suggest here is a way of thinking about intersubjective form that really what it's doing here is it's playing an invitational role. It's inviting the presentee to join in. So when McDowell talks about coming to see things aright, I think what that really amounts to is coming to share the view. It's coming to share the we intention that was offered via a reason statement or some other expression. So what I want to say to conclude here is I want to try to connect this to something that we've talked about before, about sort of collectivist and individualist readings of we intentions. And then I also want to make a proposal for collective intentionality theorists. And I'm also hoping that the collective intentionality theorist in the room can help me understand if I'm leaving something important out, or if there's other connections that I won't make here. So first is when it comes to collectivism and individualism about we intending. What I want to suggest here is that if we interpret we intentions according to sort of collectivist readings, that's going to pump or it's going to prime externalist intuitions. Right? So if we read we intending in this way that I called collectivist, then an external reason statement is true because of the shared intentions and the group attitudes that one presupposes whenever one we intends. But if you have an individualist reading of we intending, where we really emphasize the fact that I can we intend even if no one shares it, and I'm not coercing anyone, if we really emphasize that part in our interpretation of we intentions, then we're going to be sort of primed to reason's internalism. Right? That's going to pump internalist intuitions. And there we would say that reason statements are performance conditionally equivalent to we intention expressions. Right? So one can we intend alone, since the intersubjective form of a we intention is about its being shareable and not actually being shared or presupposed to be shared. So to recognize that my community's members have certain motivational sets is not on its own for me to have a moral reason. But to present a moral reason is to invite the presentee to share a shareable practical commitment. When I offer that reason, or when I express that practical commitment, it's my commitment. But because it has that form, because I can think in terms of we, it can become ours, and that's what I'm inviting presentees to do when I express we intentions. So finally, I want to make a point. I don't think this doesn't follow from what I've said about either internalism. I think it follows from more basic fundamental points about Sellars' account of we intentions. The shall be we intentions, I think, can do a lot of the work that collective intentionality theorists want. Right? So I can substitute for P here, the mountain is moved by all of us, and then Sellars can give us an account of sort of what the division of labor might look like there. But the account of group agents and the account of group action, I think, is external to Sellars' account. It needs to be imported. So we need an independent theory about group agency and about group actions. And we can bring that to Sellars and plug it in where we want. I don't think we're going to extract it from Sellars, but we can import it there. And the one thing I wanted to suggest is sort of a notational device that might help us to keep clear when we're talking about collective agents or individual agents. So you could think of a we sub pi to mean we as in a collective sense, and we sub psi as a distributive sense. And this is often, and maybe always, going to map on a similar distinction between group performable actions and person performable actions. But again, as I said, I think that's independent of the internalisms claims that I made before. Again, thank you very much for the opportunity, and thanks everyone for your attention, and thanks in advance for your questions and objections.
All right. Glenn, does your hand up there? No? Okay. I have been advised that we are strict on time, so at 4:40 we will wrap up this session. Preston, why don't you take it?
So this something that Kurt and I were talking about a moment ago, about the importance of these analyses in their ability to handle compositional accounts of meaning and embedding in different contexts. So let me raise two concerns about that. One with regard to temporal modality and another with regard to location. So can you go to slide 31? This one I'm less confident is a substantial word, but let me just see. So when we hear about something like Caesar had a reason not to go to the theater on the Ides of March, but there's nothing I'm saying any of us should do. Caesar had a reason not to go to the theater on the Ides of March. And you might even make it to make it more, because whatever analysis you give, you don't want equivocation. So I have a reason to be here on time tomorrow. Right? So now that you can handle that with the analysis, it seems like that's the way. But then tomorrow afternoon, I should be able to say I had a reason to be on time this morning, and not do equivocation. Right? I should be talking about the same kind of reason. I mean, why can't I just appeal to all of once I go to sort of the shall and the logic of intentions that Sellars works out, he wants to admit of negation. He wants to admit of embedding. Why can't I just say, oh, well, it's there?
I'm asking you what the answer is. And I think he's got issues with negation. That's my second point. But this
Right.
is about the template stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. So thank you for that. I don't feel prepared to defend that. But I don't think it's a weakness of anything I'm arguing about the internalisms, right?
That's fair. That's fair. But the question is just like, with regard to the account, how plausible should we take it to be as a general account of the kind of things we do when we talk about reason? It seems like something you've got to be able to account for. You've got to talk about what reason Caesar has. I'll just say, I think it might be the case that you give a subjunctive account. What I would do, or what we, shall, I think, is the subjunctive, or should. So you might think
Yeah.
that there's a way of getting around that. But anyway, that seems like, again, to go back to what we talked about earlier, when we're getting accounts like this, it seems like we've got to think about how they embed, how they, are they going to give us a compositional theory, how are they going to give us be part of a composition?
Yeah.
So look, can you go down to slide 15? And I'll just do this very quickly because this is something that I really wish we did. That I looked at. So look, there's a key difference between shall and ought. Ought just makes a distinction between strong modality, and that is a function of the way negation reacts with ought. Because you get obligation and forbidden sitting next to you with permitted. And so there's all the difference in the world between what you ought not do and what it's the case that it's not the case that you ought to do. How is shall going to handle that? Now, Gibbard does this in terms of, and I'll talk about this tomorrow, Gibbard does this in terms of preference and indifference, which unfortunately people accuse of negation by not paying any attention to ought itself as a footnote or anything, but otherwise they just completely ignore that. So again, going back to what we were talking about, not needing character. And then what I thought, after I started looking into this, and I went to Pascal, but in two essays in the 60s and 70s, Sellars makes a distinction between preference and indifference when he's talking about ought. But one point that he makes, he says, I'm just sketching the big picture, I'm not looking at detail. So I think we now have good evidence, which is a formal feature of the way these models interact with relations, that you can't say that ought can exclusively fail. They are alike species of genus practical cognition, but they're differentiated by the fact that to make sense of the way in which negation interacts with ought, you've got to integrate a kind of planning cognition in more fine-grained level of detail.
Mm-hmm.
So I will shut up there. I've published about this a bunch. I'm not hammering on you about this. I see it all the time. It's frustrating with this stuff.
Right. So yeah, thank you for that. I think for the big picture, I mean, if I were up here and say I'm going to tell you why metaethical intentionalism is correct and can handle sort of embedding problems, then I think I would definitely owe you an answer, right? But I think what I want to do is, what I'm trying to do in this project is focus on what that account means for the two internalisms. All right?
We'll talk about that.
Okay. All right.
Kirk, why don't you take the next one?
Thanks. Well, that's what Preston said. I thought there might be another sort of worry for your response to the, explaining away the externalist story. So, if I say John has a reason to care for his children, and you want to say, that's like me saying, shall we, any one of us, care for John's children? But it seems to me that that's not right, because John has a special relation to his children, which means he ought to, or has a reason to, but I don't. So I, probably can handle that in some way or other, but maybe that's a little wrinkle that needs to be taken into account. I'll stop there.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I think that I think that there's a way. I mean, there's a hope that you can handle a lot of that stuff by the NC. So we shall, any of us, care for those who are in our care. at a general level, and then John being in that situation with his children would lead to John having this, shall I, as one of us, care for my children. So I don't think that that's a problem. I don't think that's a problem that's specifically about the reason statement or my claim that the reason statement can be understood in terms of we intentions. I think that's a problem you could raise even for like forget about the reason statements. Just thinking about we shall any of us do A and C. How do those get relativized or tailored to individual agents, given that they're in different circumstances? But it's an important thing. But I think that's the kind of response to give to that.
Sophie.
Okay, thank you. That was very interesting. I also like to push back against metaethical intentionalism a bit, obviously, but in the context of motivational internalism. What I can't see clearly yet is why, if you adopt metaethical intentionalism, why this, or you think that Sellars does, right? Why this shouldn't commit him to the strong form of internalism that you said correctly, of course, that he does not want to be committed to. Because, as you said, right, if you adopt an intention, then you have a practical commitment to do a thing. And why shouldn't that be a conclusively powerful reason? And of course, you have the account in knowing the better and doing the worse of having these 2 points of view, right? You can form an intention from the I perspective, from the we perspective, and they can conflict. And this is how you might feel that something like weakness of the will might come in, right? One intention interfering with the other. But I can't think that, I don't think that you can say that you can somehow adopt both these potentially conflicting intentions from both these point of view. You might contemplate both at the time, right? But you cannot adopt them both. So why shouldn't metaethical intentionalism not commit him to this strong form of internalism?
I say it commits him to the weak motivational internalism, because when I intend, I have a kind of state that is motivating because of its tie to action. But there are other intentions. There are, as you say, like in knowing the better and doing the worse, there could be an I intention that ripens into a volition rather than the we intention.
What I don't understand is how I could have both at the same time. I would be incoherent if I intended I shall do A and sub we not do A, and this would probably be quite clear to me that I'm incoherent, right?
Well, we do this with beliefs. The state content distinction is relevant here. So we don't always believe all of the implications of the beliefs that we hold, right? And similarly, we don't always intend all of the things that are entailed or implied by the intentions that we take on. So I think it's true to life that people walk around with conflicting intentions. And many of them, just as it's true to life that we walk around with contradictory beliefs or beliefs that would lead to contradictions. So, I mean, does that answer?
Yeah, I see the direction.
Mm-hmm. I mean, think about. Many of these intentions are conditional in form. I shall do A if C, and I don't believe that C obtains, but I still have that standing intention, even though I'm not doing A.
Jeremy.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that. So a question about the way you're understanding reason. So, if I say, shall we, I do A and C, as that's sort of expressing a reason for myself. So I have a couple of related concerns, I guess. So, as I think Sellars was clear-ish on, that's a we intention because it's derived from this logically intersubjective intention. And so the logically intersubjective intention has a form that seems a lot more general. Shall be, each of us does AI and CI. And so, that's the logically intersubjective intention from which I derive my sort of individual we intention. And it seems like that plausibly is an intention that when I express that applies not just to me, but to you and 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 everybody. So, if I express that intention, I am expressing an intention that, you could say that's a reason that at least I intend to, or ostensibly applies to everyone. But, more importantly, this is a reason, this is an intention that's supposed to be categorically valid. This is supposed to be an intention or derived from an intention that is binding on all rational beings in virtue of their rational beinghood. It seems like if you give up on reason's externalism, you're giving up on the categorical bindingness of these sort of supervening intentions from which we derive these individual, what you're calling reason intentions. So that's sort of a two-part question that I hope that was clear enough.
Thank you for that. So as I said in the first part, I was going to set aside the categorically valid intentions component. I invited you to tell me if that's a mistake, right? And maybe that maybe that is a mistake, and then would tilt the scales back to, or tip the scales back to an externalist reading, or sort of underline the externalist components of his account of reasons. So I think that something I need to work out, maybe I'm just restating your question, is how do the intersubjective content, how does that intersubjective content plus the intersubjective form, is that enough for it to count as a reason? Maybe it only counts as a reason because of that categorically valid component. So I need to think that through. But on the Wilson type view that I'm thinking is that this counts as when I give a reason, it counts as a reason because I take it to be one, right? And I think that taking it to be one is independent of the categorically valid intention component. And then the other part was about, the first part I think of your question was about how the we here, in a we intention, makes it apply to everyone, or is sort of
it's the we intention is derived from the logically intersubjective intention that has the form, like shall be does A and C, and that seems less egocentric in form.
Yeah. Okay, so one thing, when I go from each of us to I think that's a matter of each of us being universalizable content, and then it applies to me. And I think that the intersubjective form is retained. If I can go back, I'm sorry. I think the intersubjective form here is retained in this, the subscript we here. But I do think what you're saying is important to add, and I think that me saying this stuff about invitational is pretty vague and ambiguous. And part of what makes it invitational is that it is open to others. right? And so there's an other directedness to this that I think is really important. I need to say more than just, oh, I'm inviting others. All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. I have a question about how this might generalize to other forms of reasons, right? So internalism about reasons, that was the view that having a reason motivates to act in accordance with the reason, something like that?
I'm sorry.
Internalism about reason, what was exactly your definition?
Well, William's account, the internalist thinks that the reason statement's truth conditions include something about the agent's motivational set.
Okay, and you want to defend internalism about reason in the moral case by saying that they are reasons are we intentions, and intentions generally are internally motivated. So that's how you get it. So how would that? Do you have a view about how that might generalize to other kinds of reasons, like beliefs are reasons for other beliefs or evidence? I mean, and the problem seems to be there. Well, in that case, the reason is not expressed by a re-intention, it's expressed by an expression of belief, right? So that is one problem, and they don't, the states expressed don't seem to be internally motivational. But then in the case of belief, there's also another problem, and infinitely many implications. If we think having a belief, if it were, well, having any belief gives you a reason to form infinitely many others just by matters of logic, but we shouldn't be motivated to draw all of the consequences, right? I don't know, do you have any views on this? What within that framework might be said about beliefs as reasons?
Beliefs as reasons believe other things? I don't think I have anything, I don't think I have anything special or valuable to say there. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's disappointing.
It would be then only an internalism about moral reasons or practical reasons, right? Not theoretical reasons.
Right. I don't have any views. I'm sorry.
Bill Winch.
Yeah, so you may feel you've already dealt with this in answering Preston's thing, but I was sort of worried about sort of with your sort of the way you gave the account of the external reasons intuition. So once I start embedding something in a conditional, right? So yeah, if it looks to me as though it's intelligible to say that somebody's got some reasons even though they can't recognize them, then it looks as though it's going to be intelligible to hypothesize that they might have some, I might say, if he's got reasons that he can't even recognize, well, we should pity him rather than punish him, or something like that.
We should what?
We should pity him rather than punish him. Pity.
Oh,
pity.
Oh,
Yeah. Something like that.
Okay.
Doesn't matter too much what
Okay,
the...
sure.
So I guess the worry is that sort of once you embed it in a conditional, the sort of truth conditions carry over, but the performance conditions are not going to carry over. And is that going to be a problem? I mean, that looks as though it might be a problem. And what do you want to say about how these things will behave in conditional contexts?
Thank you. It feels like a problem when you ask me. And I think what I would do, the first step I would take is go to Jeremy's book on the Frege-Geach problem and remind myself what I think about this. But again, I don't think this is a objection or a problem for my transposing reason statements into the key of we intentions, I think it's a problem for the we intentions account to begin with. And so I'll need to brush up on that, and I will be sure to bring up these embedding problems in the paper. So it's an IOU.
Okay. All right, on my list I have Bernhard and then Glenda. And am I missing anyone else? Oh, all right.
Is there a
We'll give
deep
you another go.
reason why you didn't react to Preston's first challenge with Caesar and the ideas of March? You could have performed the gin toxic on Preston. Because Williams obviously responds to this and says, well, mistaken belief is of course ruled out. He's not defending the subhuman model, but he assumes that your beliefs are right. Gin toxic. And that will exactly be the thing. So that makes me a bit puzzled about whether you want to defend Williams' internalism or whether you have something else in mind. Could you take us to the slide where you seem to suggest that in order to be an internalist, you need to be an individualist about collective intentionality?
Oh.
I'm worried about this.
Was it here?
Yes.
Okay.
So the evil collectivist, so I'm always suspicious when this comes up, individualism, collectivism. And you've got to choose, and of course the right choice is individualism. And what I wonder here a little bit, so collectivists, they would sort of, this would be Dirk, where he thinks that now there is this group mind made up and I'm in the group, or what would he be reasoning in that model of understanding the situation? And of course, there's something fishy about this. This is exactly what the fascists and communists are promoting, right? So yeah, the class consciousness is this, and this is a reason for you. And this is fishy, right? So we want to be individualist about this. But I feel what you take on board from Williams is a certain conception of motivation. And it's a subjective motivational set. Now, if you read Williams, there's a lot of collective stuff in there, right? It's not that there's commitments in there. And, you can be individually committed to something, but usually it is something. There's all sorts of motivation that are shared, right? Well, we want to do this, and so why not? Why? I feel like your individualism has something to do. Your individualism about we intending has something to do with how you conceive of of what's internal in terms of motivation, and I feel like you need not be individualist here. You can allow for all sorts of motivations. And I read it a little bit in Williams, just that he's not bothered with the issue. It comes up when cooperation comes up. So why would you cooperate in a prison system? Maybe, we wanna do the best. So the choice is between cooperating and both defecting, right? Nobody wants to sucker the other. So that's already a shared motivation. Why not? And yeah, that's probably not individualist, even at the motivational thing, but it's certainly not collectivist in there being something extra, like some group thingy that's imposed on you, which certainly any sound reading of the situation would reject, because you would still need a motivation to go along with what you think is established as a collective attitude. You need conformist preferences in order to be the Dirk that conceives of the situation in collectivist terms. Rather, Dirk needs to see that, this is what we want to do. That protecting the refugees makes sense in terms of what we want.
Yeah.
How is this individualist?
Yeah, okay. So thank you for that. There's a lot there, and let me say a few things. So the first thing is I want to confess that the way I did not really describe how conversion works. But that wasn't my task. I was simply wanted to have at T1, Dirk does not take himself to have a reason. At T2, he does, because I wanted to explain in sort of intentionalist terms what's going on with the Magdalenian case of coming to see things aright. And I had to do that without talking about truth conditions and instead talking about sharing intentions. So the conversion here seems like magic, and I haven't really offered anything to say about how it works. The second thing, I need to go look at Williams again and correct any sort of sloppy reading that I'm doing of Williams. Right, there may be sort of collectivist stuff or going on there that I'm missing. But I think the sort of classic statement of the problem of reasons in internalism and externalism just has to do with do the truth conditions of the reason statement make reference to the individual agent's motivational set or not, right? So that was what was leading me, just almost like a Humean view of motivation here. And then, okay, what do I mean by collectivists and individualist readings? So I think this is probably a regrettable word choice. When in the chapter that's in Jeremy and Ronald's edited volume from another workshop, I said, hey, there are these two ways of reading Sellars on we intentions. And I think that the collectivists, who I'm calling the collectivists, are actually pretty diverse, right? So some of them are drinking the Durkheim Kool-Aid, right? And really do think that Sellars is talking about that kind of group agency. Others, I think, Jeremy's view, I think, is different from that. But what I was saying, the reason I was calling it collectivist was that it, on his reading, it seemed like an individual can only we intend if that individual presupposes group attitudes or presupposes that others sort of share those intentions to begin with. And I was trying to offer just a radically different view from that, according to which, and this is the reading of Sellars that really emphasizes those passages about we intentions don't need to be chorused. I don't need to think that anyone else has this intention. I can we intend alone, right? And so that's what I meant by the individualist reading. And my argument for that interpretation involved this strategy of asking, what do reports or self-ascriptions of we intentions look like? And I thought that those looked like I, as one of us, that's the expression. I, as one of us, intend, ... So the truth conditions of a we intention reporting statement are about the speaker and not about the community. Right? So that's what I meant by the individualist reading, and I think this is probably an unhelpful way of characterizing it because of the connotations here. There's probably other stuff I failed to address, but thank you.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. Let's thank our speaker.
Thank you, everybody.